In 1959, in the icy Ural Mountains, 9 experienced skiers set off on an expedition, but never returned. Their bodies were found weeks later, scattered in the snow, with unexplained injuries. What really happened that night? The Soviet Union was experiencing a period of great scientific and technological advancement, marked by the space race and the rivalry with the United States in the Cold War. The government encouraged challenges that would demonstrate the resilience and ability of Soviet citizens, especially among young people. It was against this backdrop that a group of students from the Ural Polytechnic University decided to embark on a ski expedition to the remote region of the Ural Mountains, facing freezing temperatures and treacherous terrain. The 10-member team was led by Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old engineering student experienced in mountaineering and long-distance expeditions. Their goal was to reach Mount Otorten, an isolated region some 350 kilometers north of Sverdlovsk, now Ekaterinburg. The trail they chose had a high degree of difficulty, being classified as Category 3, the highest level of complexity available to skiers at the time. Completing this expedition would not only demonstrate their skills, but would also grant each of them advanced skier certification. The expedition set off on January 23, 1959, taking a train from the city of Sverdlovsk to Ivdel, a cold, industrial city that housed one of the many forced labor camps of the Gulag system. They then took a truck to the village of Vizhai, the last inhabited spot before the icy vastness of the Ural Mountains. Vizhai was a small settlement, inhabited mainly by local workers and members of the indigenous Mansi people, who considered some areas of the mountain sacred and avoided exploring certain territories. After a short rest, the group began the trek on January 27, trudging through thick snow and temperatures ranging from -10 degrees Celsius to -30 degrees Celsius. However, within the first few days, Yuri Yudin, one of the group, began to experience severe joint pain due to a chronic condition, as well as flu-like symptoms. Knowing that he would not be able to complete the journey, he made the difficult decision to return to Vizhai, saying goodbye to his friends, without imagining that he would be the last to see them alive. Now with 9 members, the expedition continued on its route, documenting everything in diaries and photographs. On January 31, they reached the base of Mount Kholat Syakhl, a mountain whose name, in the Mansi language, means Mountain of Death. They set up a small supply depot to facilitate their return, leaving extra food and equipment there. The next day, February 1, they started climbing the mountainside. However, a heavy snowstorm drastically reduced visibility, causing them to leave their planned route and move to an uncovered area of the mountain, with no natural protection from the wind. Instead of retreating to a safer area, they decided to pitch their tent right there, possibly because they didn't want to waste time returning to the valley. This would be their last camp. But what really happened that night? When the rescue team arrived at the base of Mount Kholat Syakhl on February 26, 1959, they found a scene that defied any logical explanation. The students' camp was abandoned and their tent, partially buried by snow, showed strange signs. It had been torn from the inside out, as if its occupants had fled in desperation. There were no signs of a struggle in the surroundings, nor any traces to suggest the presence of invaders. What was striking were the footprints in the snow, traces of barefoot steps and people wearing only socks or a single shoe. The trail led 500 meters away, to the edge of a nearby forest. There, under a tall tree, the first 2 bodies were found, Yuri Doroshenko and Georgy Krivonischenko. Both were barefoot, dressed only in their underwear and positioned next to an unlit fire. The tips of the tree branches were broken, suggesting that one of them may have tried to climb up, perhaps to seek shelter or spot something in the darkness. About 300 meters away, in the direction of the camp, the investigators found the body of Igor Dyatlov, the leader of the group. He was lying face down in the snow, holding a stick, with his face turned towards the tent, as if he had tried to crawl back to camp before succumbing to the cold. Further on, 2 other members, Rustam Slobodin and Zinaida Kalmogorova, were also found in similar positions, suggesting that they had tried to return, but were unable to withstand the extreme temperatures. The cause of death for all 5 was initially attributed to hypothermia, but the case was far from solved. For more than 2 months, search teams continued to scour the region. It wasn't until May 4, when the snow had partially melted, that the last 4 members were found, about 75 meters from the forest, in a ravine. Unlike the others, these bodies had serious and unexplained injuries. Nikolai Thibault-Brignol had his skull fractured with a force equivalent to a strong impact. Ludmila Dubinina and Semyon Zolotaryov suffered extensive fractures to the chest, comparable to injuries caused by a car accident, but with no signs of external trauma, as if the pressure had been applied from the inside out. Ludmila Dubinina, in addition to her internal injuries, was missing her tongue and part of her face, which led to speculation about a possible animal attack or other mutilation. Even stranger was the fact that some of the clothes had higher than normal levels of radiation. No official explanation has been able to justify this detail, and the discovery has only increased suspicions about the involvement of unknown forces. Soviet investigations were carried out quickly, but the official conclusions shed little light on the events. The final report, released in 1959, determined that the deaths occurred due to an unknown and uncontrollable force. The authorities closed the case, and the files were kept confidential for decades, further fueling speculation. Among the inconsistencies in the report, one detail caught the eye. Some witnesses who took part in the rescue reported that the bodies had a strange orange color, and some had gray hair, despite being young. With no definitive answers, the Dyatlov incident remained shrouded in mystery. What could have caused such panic that skiers fled barefoot in the middle of a blizzard? Was it a natural disaster? A secret military experiment? Or something even more disturbing? This is the point at which theories begin to emerge, and the story becomes even more enigmatic. Below, we explore the main hypotheses raised over the decades. From the outset, the authorities tried to come up with a plausible and harmless explanation for what happened on the Dyatlov Pass. One of the first hypotheses raised was that an avalanche had hit the camp, forcing skiers to flee desperately into the deadly cold. But there was a problem. There were no obvious signs of a snow slide in the area. The group's tent was still partially exposed, intact enough to suggest that it had never been buried. In addition, the first bodies found were not covered by large volumes of snow, which would have been expected if an avalanche had occurred. If there was no avalanche, why did the skiers run out without clothes in the middle of the night? In recent years, a new attempt to explain the mystery has emerged, the block avalanche theory. According to this hypothesis, a compact layer of snow would have slid over the camp, creating a displacement of air powerful enough to cause serious internal injuries without completely burying the area. Interestingly, a study published in 2021 in the journal Nature simulated this phenomenon using an algorithm inspired by the Disney movie Frozen. The idea was to demonstrate how an avalanche could cause the types of injuries found on the bodies of the Dyatlov group. The avalanche theory may seem like a convenient explanation, but it doesn't answer all the mysteries. The Soviet government wanted the world to believe that nature was solely responsible for the fate of the Dyatlov group. But to this day, the truth remains buried under the relentless snow of the Ural Mountains, and may never be revealed. From the outset, the authorities' response to the Dyatlov incident was strangely controlled. The case files were immediately classified as secret, inaccessible for decades. Soviet officials arrived at the scene even before the rescue team, but never revealed what they actually found. Any attempt at further investigation was quickly stifled. The official explanation? A mere, unknown force had caused the group's death. Too vague a justification for one of the most disturbing cases in history. The location of the camp where the bodies were found was no ordinary place. The area was relatively close to Novaya Zemlya, one of the Soviet Union's main nuclear testing grounds. In the midst of the Cold War, the USSR went to great lengths to develop new war technologies, and top-secret experiments were conducted in isolated regions of Siberia, far from the eyes of the West. Chemical weapons, microwave pulses, sonic and nuclear tests. Could the Dyatlov climbers have been the accidental victims of one of these experiments? On the night of the incident, an orange glow appeared in the sky, seen by local residents. Luminous spheres hovered above the mountains, moving in an anomalous way, without a sound or a trace. Were they just meteors? Or something much more sinister? Historical reports indicate that in February 1959, the Soviet Union was conducting tests with R-7 ballistic missiles in the northern Urals. Coincidence? Some researchers suggest that the Dyatlov group may have been hit by a shock wave generated by a distant explosion, causing devastating internal fractures without leaving any visible external signs. But there is an even more disturbing detail. Analyses revealed abnormal levels of radiation on the clothes of some victims. Not enough to cause instant death, but enough to suggest exposure to an extreme event. What really happened that night? Had the 9 climbers witnessed something they weren't supposed to see? Were they victims of an experiment that got out of hand? Or were they silenced so that a secret would never be revealed? The Ural Mountains, known for their harsh conditions and merciless winds, may have been the scene of a little-known phenomenon, but one capable of causing devastating psychological effects. When the wind hits a mountain range or natural obstacle, it can create an alternating pattern of whirlwinds, generating infrasound waves, sounds of such low frequency that they are inaudible to the human ear, but whose effects on the body and mind are deeply disturbing. Studies show that prolonged exposure to infrasound can cause an intense feeling of dread and paranoia, even for no apparent reason. Disorientation, nausea and dizziness, making any attempt at a logical reaction difficult. Auditory and visual hallucinations, making the victim believe they are being watched or stalked. If the wind that crossed the mountains that night generated a Kármán vortex, the skiers may have been enveloped by an invisible and overwhelming terror, overcome by uncontrollable despair. Under the influence of a collective panic attack, the group may have irrationally fled the hut, driven only by the instinct for survival, without proper clothing, without thinking of the consequences. As they made their way through the snow, some collapsed in exhaustion, while others tried to improvise a shelter in the hope of escaping the lethal cold. The injuries found on some of the victims, fractured ribs and skulls, but no signs of obvious external impact, could be explained by their fall into a nearby ravine, a tragic fate for those running bewildered in the dark and in freezing temperatures. Although the Kármán vortex theory offers a plausible explanation for the climbers' desperate behavior, it doesn't clear up all the elements of the mystery. The presence of radiation on their clothes, reports of luminous spheres in the sky and the fact that some victims had frozen expressions of horror on their faces still raise questions. Had those young people seen something they shouldn't have seen? Had they made contact with entities that don't tolerate witnesses? Witnesses reported luminous spheres crossing the darkness, moving in a way impossible for any known human technology. The orange lights hovered over the mountains, disappearing and reappearing without explanation, as if they were watching something, or someone. In the official investigation records, there are mentions of bright objects in the sky in the days leading up to the tragedy. Whatever was flying over that region that night was no ordinary phenomenon, and it may have sealed the fate of Dyatlov's group. When the bodies were finally found, the details were worthy of a nightmare. Some of the climbers had violent internal fractures, but no external marks, as if an invisible force had crushed them from the inside. The impact required to cause such damage would be equivalent to a high-speed car crash, something impossible in the conditions in which they were found. But the most sinister details were yet to come. 2 of the victims were missing their eyes, while one had her tongue torn out. Precise mutilations, with no signs of a struggle, surgical cuts that raise a terrifying possibility. Were these injuries the result of non-human experimentation? Science has yet to explain what happened to the bodies of Dyatlov's group, but there are patterns similar to cases reported throughout history, mutilations associated with extraterrestrial contact. At the time, any information about unidentified aerial phenomena was hidden from the public and treated as a state secret. If the climbers really did witness extraterrestrial contact, the government cover-up makes sense. In the official records of the search, one detail went unnoticed by many: strange footprints were found around the site of the tragedy. Footprints much larger than any human foot. Some of them, according to reports not released to the press at the time, did not belong to any of the 9 climbers. Tracks that pointed to something big, something unknown, something walking in the snow, and it wasn't human. Had Dyatlov's group found the legendary Yeti? Among the documents leaked over the years, one statement stood out, that of a member of the rescue team, who described a dark detail never officially mentioned. We felt that something was still there, watching us. All the time. And when we found the bodies, one of our men whispered, "This wasn't the work of a human." The legend of the Siberian Yeti spans generations among the local people. For them, the mountains are their territory, and those who dare to enter their domain rarely come back to tell the tale. What really happened on that night of February 1, 1959? More than 60 years later, the Dyatlov incident remains one of the most perplexing unsolved mysteries in modern history. No single theory can account for all the bizarre and chilling details discovered at the site, leaving endless room for speculation. Were these experienced hikers caught in the grip of an extreme natural disaster? Unwitting test subjects in a classified military experiment? Or did they encounter something far more inexplicable that fateful night? One thing is certain: the truth is still buried beneath the frozen silence of the Ural Mountains. Was this a tragic accident, or is there something the world was never meant to know? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. What do you believe really happened on Dyatlov Pass?